All right, we are here. We are ready to go. Welcome, everybody. It is episode 9 of Gen GMs. That over there is Zach.
And this, no,
Oh, no, the other.
this, this is nothing. This
That's
is Greg.
nothing. That's my Discord over there. That's
Yeah,
all that
yeah,
is. That's maybe it's this guy. See?
yeah.
What doesn't
Ah,
kill you gives you
yes.
XP.
There
See?
you go.
Very, very appropriate. He's
Yeah,
incredibly cute but determined.
I
Anyway,
like that.
yeah, welcome everybody. We are back. It has been a busy summer, but
Hmm.
thank you for those of you who are subscribing and are listening and are spreading the word and stuff like that. This is episode 9 in long episode form, but obviously there'll be some shorts coming out from this as well. So thank you for spreading the word. And if you haven't done so already, what's wrong with you? No, please let people know about our show and all that kind of good stuff. Zach, have you since we spoke last? I mean, I
Yeah.
do know this a little bit, but have there been any super cool, like, I can't believe this bit of news is about to happen in the world of TTRPGs type of thing that you wanted to mention quickly, or?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Of course. I actually have some of the stuff right here. I got my closet and office reorganized a little bit.
Okay.
I run several programs for kids and teens here in the Bay Area, tabletop programs, mostly a lot of D&D, a bit of Dagger Heart, Cyberpunk, stuff like that. And I had the pleasure, long story short, I had the pleasure of doing some work briefly with Critical Role, and they heard about the programs that I work with, so they just sent a whole bunch of stuff. None of which I've had the opportunity to give away yet because my programs haven't restarted. They're one of them is restarting later this month, and then the month after that. But I have here, I still have to put them away. But there are so many of these
Ooh.
WizKids Critical Role miniatures, which is amazing because I have my own collection of minis that occasionally I bring in. I mean, it's a lot to carry into a place, and of things to potentially be stolen minis is not one thing that I want. So I don't tend to take them in too often. And stolen not by kids, but by people that I'm encountering from transit in San Francisco.
Right.
But they actually, Critical Role sent many, many things, including backpacks for back to school, which is very, very nice of them, and also miniatures. So yeah, I have a whole bunch of WizKids miniatures here that are going to live at the different programs that I run at the library, at my high school. So that'll be great. And today actually marks the early release date of 5th edition revised, or 5R is what some people are calling it instead of 5E. I like that
Yes.
because unfortunately Wizards hasn't really put out like a, hey guys, just so you know, here's the abbreviation.
I kind of think
Um,
they're sort of soft pedaling it because they don't necessarily want
yeah,
people
they
to
don't.
know for sure.
Yeah, they were so, what happened with one D&D was so traumatic, understandably, that are like, we don't want to name it anything. It's
It's more
D&D
D&D.
2024. Yeah, no. I saw on a Reddit thread recently that people were calling it 5R for revised, and I was like, okay, that works. I like it.
That's reasonable.
So yeah, and before we get to the questions, at yourself being an English professor and starting your semester soon, I was thinking to myself in my own life, I was like, man, I have not read a book in a long time. Like, I have many, many books here in my office, and my major in college was also English. But I haven't, with the inundation of movies and TV shows and video games, I have not really sat down to read a book in a long time. So I had reason to go to a local half price books recently
Okay.
and to browse around. And I met some amazing gentlemen who were also browsing the fantasy sci-fi section, who are way more bookish than I am, and had read like 40 to 50% of this huge bookcase that we were
Wow.
looking at. And so
Yeah.
I asked them for recommendations. So just a quick lightning round for the
Okay.
reading listeners, and curious to see if you are familiar with any of these. So first up, I have 6 books, and we'll just do a lightning round. If
Okay.
you've seen them, heard of them, or know the author. The Traitor, Beru Cormorant by Seth
Yes.
Dickinson.
Have heard of it, heard good things about it. Don't know Seth myself, but I've heard good things about that book.
Yes. This is the first one I've started with. Absolute page turner, brilliant, amazing. Commentary on colonization, but in a fantasy setting.
Yeah.
Really, really, really
I
good.
can see that being up your alley. Yeah.
Yeah. This one I got just because the cover's cool, but we'll see if the book ends up being good. This is The Blood Trials by N.E. Davenport.
I know Davenport a little. I know the name Davenport. I'm not familiar with that title though.
hmm But yeah, in that's something I realized when I was looking at the bookcases is with a book, really the spine, you
Fine.
have to have a good spine.
Yeah.
If people don't know who they're looking for, like me, I was like, I don't know what to get. I was like, ooh, cool, pretty,
Yep.
cool character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now I know you know this author, but I don't remember anything about this person. This is and these most of these were recommended to me by a very wonderful man named Keith, who I met, a fellow, reader in the
Okay.
library or the shop. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula
Oh
K.
yeah,
Le
Ursula K.
Guin,
Le Guin. Sure.
which
I
this
love Le
name is
Guin.
very familiar, but I don't know what they have written.
Well, she's written a number of things, but the two things I would highlight are The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, which is one of the
Mm,
most influential short works of all time, not just science fiction or fantasy, worth reading, and then
mhm.
Wizard of Earthsea, which is something I teach actually in my fantasy fiction course. Also wonderful work, and then also The Dispossessed, and like there's a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Ursula Le Guin is a wonderful writer, and actually, interestingly, was an anthropologist. Her parents were anthropologists, and she really sort of approached this with an anthropological kind of basis, which is why some of the first major characters of color in fantasy appear in A Wizard of Earthsea, even though nobody ever pays attention to it, including sci-fi
Ah.
when they did their stuff. So, like, Ged is the main character of A Wizard of Earthsea, is described as having copper skin, and most of the people, in fact, the quote bad people in there tend to be more Nordic, like super
hmm
pale white,
Yeah.
and not the other, and yet people just always miss it, and that representation
Yeah.
is really interesting. But it was largely because she knew anthropology and she knew what was likely,
Right.
demographically and otherwise for a group to be. Wonderful writer. Love Ursula Gwynn.
Very cool. Yeah, the Keith, my friend who recommended these to me, these were very interesting. So within the trader immediately starts, and you learn within the first 2 pages that the main character has two fathers and one mother, and that's how the family unit works.
Hmm.
Thought that was really interesting.
Yep.
And then the back of this book, the first sentence on the back of the book, when Keith was like, "Oh, you have you read this?" And I read the first sentence. On the planet Winter, there is no gender, and I was like, "Perfect, amazing, I
Yep.
want to read
Yep.
it."
It's great. It's great stuff. And the
So,
thing I want to note is that her work is much earlier than people think to be doing those things, right? Like if The
mm,
Left Hand of Darkness comes out in
yeah,
2020, you're like, okay, but this came out way
right.
earlier than that. It's
Let's
like
see if
challenge
there's
19,
like the ISBN is in here or something.
it's 78.
69,
Say again?
1969.
Oh, that's wet. See, that's even 10 years earlier than I thought. Yeah,
Wow,
69. Yeah. Yep. It's around for a long time, doing good work for a long time.
cool.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thought study.
That's gonna
So
be a good experience.
yeah.
Okay, last two, and then this will begin with my question to you. But I
Okay.
thought this was a relevant, a little mini game we can play.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, Andy Weir, but not The Martian.
Not The Martian.
Project Hail Mary, which is, I
Oh, no,
think,
I know Andy Weir, of course, but I
most
don't know Project Hail
most
Mary.
recent. Yeah, so this was recommended to be by one of the clerks and described as, I hope this is accurate, but after The Martian, there was one book in the middle that neither of us remembered the name of, and then this, Project Hail Mary, about a person who wakes up on a space station with amnesia and doesn't know why they're there. And I was like, that's interesting. And then it
Hmm.
gets more complicated. But I had seen the Martian movie, really enjoyed it, and uh, oh yeah, it literally says on the cover of the book, author of The Martian.
Author of The Martian.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so that was cool.
Now a
And
major motion
then
picture.
lastly, this one, I'm curious if you've even heard of it. So this is the favorite book of the guy that I met in Half Price Books who recommended to me most of these other ones. This is his favorite book, but he warned me at first against it and did not want to suggest it because it was so dense, uh, controversial potentially, and a hard read. And this is by Gene Wolfe, and it's called Shadow and Claw.
Yeah. Well, Gene, you could have just said hard and dense and then said Gene Wolfe. Yeah,
Yeah.
Gene. So Interestingly, Gene Wolfe was um, uh, basically was a huge mentor for our mutual friend Claire Cooney.
Okay. Oh, all right.
And so he is
Like literally or just ephemerally?
no,
That's not the right
I
way to
would
phrase
say I
it,
would
but
say fairly. In
they know
fact,
each other?
in before I speak out of turn,
Okay.
I just want to make sure that there was yes. When he passed away in 2019,
Hmm.
um, she wrote in her blog, Claire did, about the about Gene Wolfe when Gene Wolfe passed away,
Hmm.
and called him "Farewell, my Gene." So that should give you an idea.
Wow.
Like, yeah, they were very closely connected.
That's
Wolf
really cool.
Wolf is in yeah is extremely dense.
Hmm.
He's in this sort of line of people that it's like extremely important, and he's one of those people that you feel like we need people like this as a touchstone for what the field, like, if anyone is sort of like, that stuff is all kind of like cotton candy, you go, really, because this, right? And then you hand them
Mm,
that, and then they
yeah.
shut up because no one would make that argument about Gene Wolfe. um, I would not describe it as it definitely is not an easy read,
Yeah.
easy work. But Wolf is like, conceptually what Wolf is doing is
Yeah.
really great. It's not just about world building; it's really about the concepts that Wolf brings. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so good
Yep.
stuff.
So we'll
I
we'll
notice
see.
all science fiction, by the way.
I suppose so, yeah.
Yep.
The
Oh well,
barocormorant
one of
is
them.
not
No,
not
the
science
fifth
fiction.
one of the six was not.
Yeah. Yeah, barocormorant, as far as I can tell so far, definitely not science fiction, more
Hmm.
fantasy. Um, but
No, that's true.
yeah,
Mostly science fiction, but yes.
mostly science fiction. Yeah, which I wasn't even attempting to do, but
Yeah, it
here
just
we
happened.
are.
No, that's cool.
So
That's cool.
anyway,
No,
yeah,
I look forward to hearing your report on those things.
yeah. I it was really I had a great experience. I met two incredibly smart, amazing guys who read way more than I do, who are maybe I think both in their 40s or so. And just immediately, I had so many questions because I haven't read in such a long time. Not that reading is such a foreign thing anymore, but just like I was curious about their process as people who read. I think this guy said he wanted to read 80 books a year or something like that
Wow.
is his goal. And like I was
I
like, I was like, how do you guys keep reading with so many? My main forms of entertainment are video games and shows and all this stuff. And they danced around the question a little bit in my perspective, but essentially. The thing I came away with is like reading is their main thing, and like I think I talked to more people than just those two guys, but they sort of stuck in my mind. And a lot of the people that you meet in a store like that, reading is their main thing. And like, I had this thought almost going into a place like that and being like, do people even really read that much anymore? Um, and heck yeah, they do. So I'm excited. I'm already almost 100 pages into Barracormant after this is day 2. So it's a page turner, and I forgot how good it is. And the last thing I'll say about it before we move on is specifically with this book, the thing I've learned about it, aside from the amazing theme and the characters and so on, is that the pacing of this is really quick, but not in a way that's displeasurable.
Hmm.
Because in the Trader Bear Cormorant, in a single chapter, a you start the chapter in one day and then you end the chapter like 5 years later, but it all works. Like there's an intense, almost like movie like focus on the important stuff that you need to see,
Hmm.
and then once you've seen it and the thesis statement has been made, or the finishing statement, whatever, moves on to the next relevant part. And it is starting to slow its pace down now in chapters 4 or 5 or so, but it was very movie like in the sense of like starting out young. Okay, by the end of this chapter, 7 years have passed. Like, but it all makes sense. So it was
Yeah, that's
very.
cool.
I
That's
was
cool.
used to the idea of something like Lord of the Rings, where it's like the moment that the story really starts, you're taking it minute by minute, day by day. Like that's how most books are paced, right?
Right.
But yeah, so it was interesting seeing a successful version of that. I was like, man, if you told me reading a book where the pacing's like skipping months at a time, I wouldn't be up for it
Have you
generally.
read
But
Have you read This Is How You Lose the Time War?
Mm-mm. No.
So if you get a chance to read, which is by Amal El-Matar and Max Gladstone, and is like New York's #1 time bestseller and whatever, and I teach that too. That also is exceedingly good at. It's a shorter book. It's a novella, but it's exceedingly good at pacing in the
Hmm.
way that you describe. And it is both thematically, there's a lot going on there, and yet really it's a love story. It's really a love story, but it's thematically drawn out over multiple different. It's the artistry of it is very, very good, and it's a book that feels very modern and fresh, and like you can come to it from a variety of different levels of understanding of it, like from teaching the field for 25 years to I just like this stuff because whatever. And
Yeah.
yeah, the thing about the 80 books thing is like you're right. I mean, like, and I mean, obviously, I read a lot. Although honestly, I'm not able to read as much new stuff as I might like during a year because I am constantly either writing myself or teaching it, or like so like, and I
Or
have to
yeah.
reread stuff for that.
Yeah.
But I have really enjoyed the experience of being able to read stuff. I picked up a Middle Earth book when I was in the UK. That was a
Oh.
nonfiction book about the roots of Middle Earth, most of which I knew,
Hmm.
but some of
Okay.
the stuff is different, and also it has a gorgeous cover. Maybe I'll show it later on, but
Yeah.
it was super cool, and it was a reminder of how I enjoy well-written sort of nonfiction work, which I read in a way even less because I'm so busy on doing this other fictional stuff.
Yeah.
And I got to read Roger Zelazny and some others that I sort of giants of the field that was a gap in my reading. But anyway, the point being that like even at my top speed, I'm a fast reader, but to be able to read 80 books a year, I would have to essentially not stream, not be doing, not ever do anything else except just be reading, and I can't. I
Yeah.
can't do that. I want to sort of remember the books that I read after I read them a
Yeah.
little bit. So,
That was one of the things I met. Another, so the second guy that I met was named Dominic,
mhm.
and I was asking him some of the same questions that I asked my new friend Keith. And uh, Dominic, I was like, how do you retain? Because he also read a lot. It was obvious, and I was like, how do you retain all this information? And he was like, I take notes. I take notes while I'm reading.
Ah,
It's an active thing for him, where he creates documents, or he doesn't create documents. It's not even digital. He has a physical notebook where as he's reading, he will write down what he's reading
I love these
and keep
people, by
track
the
of
way.
characters. Yeah, they
I
are
want these
like
people to
yeah,
find their way to my work.
I
Like,
know,
you know.
man.
But
It was
I
so
have to
cool.
I have to say though, this is one thing that really applies to what we're doing on the show.
Hmm.
I believe you asked me some episodes ago about having like, you know, NPC things or like things that I can pull out or dialogue, and a lot
Yes.
of that is a function of an enormous amount of reading,
Yep.
and being able to draw from different fields, because it just osmotically you absorb some of it, like
Yeah.
you kind of are immersed in it, and that's one of many examples of why AI has all these issues because you're not
Yeah.
actually doing the work of writing, and you're not actually doing the work in some ways of reading either. If you're just
Mhm.
having AI summarizing stuff for you, first of all, it's bad at it, but
Yeah.
secondly, it's not doing the actual work that reading is. So if just this is just a sort of aside, but as a GM tip, if you can read widely, you'll not only find it enjoyable, and I don't just mean source books, I mean works of fiction
Of
and
course.
nonfiction. But
Yeah.
if you can read widely, you will have so many tools in the toolbox, as my friend Brad Bollier says, that you can pull out and use at the right moment. So anyway,
Yeah.
reading is
Exactly.
fundamental. That's what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. I like the opening chapter of Beru Cormorant is so good, and there are just so many wonderful allegories, similes, phrases in here, idioms, and so on that uh, are starting to ingrain in my mind. And also, like, the wonderful thing about fiction is it can make topics that may not be the most entertaining,
Yes.
like reading about colonization. You know
Yep.
what I mean?
Yep.
Like, important topic, but would I sit down? Oh, actually, I would. I would sit down to read about historical colonization, but the way that this book portrays it through the perspective, first person of a character, um, it makes it come across in much a different way, and it lets you relate to a person who's going through it,
Right.
which is
Right.
very important for actually like retaining that information. So yeah, it's I'm falling back in love with reading. Not that I went, years without reading a single thing, but honestly, I don't think I've finished a book in a couple years. Um,
Well, and I mean, this is a
so
good thing too, is like you have, you don't have to do everything at once. You can read a book, you can
right,
watch some, like as you know, I also love games and things like that too. So I think that these things can work in parallel, but it's
yeah,
amazing how much when they work in parallel, you get so much value out of each thing, out of the
yes,
games become in a way deeper, in part because of the background that books give you and understanding of what narrative structure does in a game sense
yep,
is to me very enriching when it comes to how I'm affected by poetry or, fiction that's of a shorter length or a longer length or whatever. So,
yeah,
yeah, anyway,
yeah.
so I'm excited to hear the report. I think that's cool.
Yeah,
Good for your friend Keith, your new friend Keith.
yes, yeah, yeah. For a while there, having spent so much time just playing games and just watching shows, when I was when you are that type of person, who's just like, oh, I don't read anymore, I almost was convincing myself that it wouldn't be worth it.
Mm,
And of course I knew it would be, but I was almost like, well, what book is really going to be more entertaining than this or more cool than this or things like
right.
that. And so not that I didn't want to like reading, I really did, going back into it. But the moment I cracked open the Trader, at least this is just props to Seth Dickinson so far. When I get to the other books, we'll see how they
Yeah,
measure
yeah,
up.
yeah.
I'm sure it'll be good, but so far, starting with this one, like first chapter, I was like, yep, okay, I was wrong. this is this is good.
No, it's good
There,
stuff, man. It's
yeah.
good stuff. I'm excited for you. It's great.
So yeah, okay. So with that topical tangent now out of the way, I have my first question for you,
Okay.
which has nothing to do with books or authors or anything like that.
Oh, all right.
So this question, I was having trouble coming up with questions because we've talked a lot, but in all of these episodes,
Yes.
asking questions back and forth and keeping it within the topic of GMing. I think one aspect that we're already starting to touch on is that there's value in talking about the realms that relate and the Venn diagrams that cross with GMing
Yep.
as well. But
Yep.
so my question is relates to burnout, which
Ooh.
is the phrase modernly meaning doing something so much that you're starting to lose inspiration or drive to do it, and often you have to look somewhere else for inspiration, or some people the
Yeah.
burnout causes them to give up altogether. So my question for you is, how do you experience burnout? Do you experience burnout as a game master? What is that like for you? How do you handle it? Do you even realize that you are burned out, or like do you not realize until it's too late and you're like, ah, I need to take a break? And then what does the recovery of that look like for you? Like, is it other forms of media that help refresh your creativity or changing your perspective or so on? So, like, what's your experience with getting tired of GMing and recovering from that feeling?
That's a good question. So I guess the way that I would answer that is I'd say, um, I mean, yes. So on a certain level, there have been moments where I've experienced burnout, and that partially has to do with. So I mean, at the peak of what I do, I have run as many as 5 campaigns a month, which is a little nuts,
Yeah, yeah,
frankly. And it means that there's a lot of extra stuff that I have to kind of keep in my head and kind of it helps to have videos, it helps to have stuff like that. But what I find is that the burnout comes when I feel like I'm getting pulled away from other stuff that I would like to be doing, like spending time with the family or getting some of my own writing work done, or like even something where I feel like I want to stop and just play a game for myself, or read for pleasure, as we were talking about earlier, or whatever the case may be. And so what ends up happening in those situations instead is I get done with whatever GMing stuff I have to do. And I get done with obviously the stuff that pays me, which is my teaching career. Right. And then I'm sort of like, I have to I procrastinate, right? Or I sit there and I'm like, I'll watch some Law and Order episodes, but not as background just because I'm watching them. And then at a certain point I'm like, am I really getting any value out of these, or is this because I'm trying to avoid
Yeah,
getting to the other stuff that I should be doing, but I feel resentful because I haven't had a chance, whatever.
right.
And so it's less burnout with the game mastering itself as much as it is all of a particular vein of experience, right? And as much as I love that vein of experience, it is one kind of thing. And doing that one kind of thing can become tiresome over time. When I was growing up, I thought at one point I was going to go into music performance because I played trumpet and I was
Mm,
pretty good. And there was a point when I even applied, when I went to college, I applied and I auditioned to get in, as a music performance major. And the reality is that on a certain level, that probably wasn't going to work for me anyway, because I cannot, to get to be at, and you can appreciate this as a musician yourself, to
yeah,
get to be at the level that you would need to be a music performance major, let alone beyond it, we're talking 5, 6 hours of practice a day. Like to really get to the point where you would become sort of that level, maybe a little much, maybe 3 to 4. But the point is like
yeah.
you would be doing many hours per day.
It's your main thing.
Yeah, it's your exactly like that's your thing. And there are some people who just like that's their thing and that's all they want to do and that's all and that's and God bless them if that's what they want to do. But I never felt like I could be so connected to that one thing alone, partly because I thought what I was best at was drawing in different. I feel like I'm a connector in some parts. I'm a synthesizer. I can bring in elements. I have my own creative ideas, but
Yeah,
it's combining those ideas and elements together to produce something that is, sum is greater than its parts. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, or that feels like I'm advancing the field a little bit, that I'm contributing meaningfully to the work that art plays in the world. Um, and so, I just being devoted to any one thing alone. I played tennis a lot too. Same deal. Like, I mean, do I want to do nothing but play 5, 6 hours of tennis a day? No, no, I don't. Um, do I want to? But I do want to do things that are in the broadly shaped field of story. I do want to
yeah,
do that. I do love story in all of its forms. I do love music that tells stories and creates emotion. I do love works of fiction and reading that creates that kind of field, and that's was enormously important to me growing up. I do feel like gameplay is very important to me to be able to get that sense of it, and I also feel that community is important in all this too, and that's something which you can do now more easily than you could when I was in the 80s, and my community by necessity was limited to my small circle of friends, growing in fairly rural northwestern Connecticut, right? Now it's different. Now you can be connected with people on a different coast in a different country. But I can tell you right now that having the experience of standing in a theater in London with a group of people that I played Dungeons and Dragons with for years online and never met in person is a memory I will never forget. Having the chance to meet you and stand in the Klein Theater with you
yeah,
and Claire and Carlos and Rob and Brandon and Adam and all these people,
yep,
and to do this in front of an audience is an experience that I will never forget. That's very special to me. And I think I was able to do that because I was able to cast my net broadly enough that it wouldn't be just limited to this one thing. So burnout for me usually happens when it's too much of one thing all the time. And I will say that from a game mastering perspective, when I get the feeling like if someone has to cancel, right, because of illness or something like that, if I feel relieved, that's not a great sign, right? Like if I come
mm,
out of it and I'm like, oh
mm,
God, thank God, because I don't have to prep, because now I can just play a video game, because now I can like whatever, I don't have to. If that's how I'm feeling, that's usually not a good sign.
right.
Instead, it doesn't mean that I have to be like, beating the ground with the disappointment, but like, if I'm like, oh, that's too bad. I was looking forward to it. Okay. That's where I ought to be. Like, that's where I need to land. And so,
Mm,
admittedly, when I had that many campaigns running, probably a touch too much. Now it's dropped to 4 and may or may not end up dropping to 3. But
mm,
I think focusing on 2 or 3 campaigns a month probably will end up being more of the sweet spot for me. So yes, burnout happens, and the way that I usually deal with it, in answer to that question, is to try to vary the things that I'm doing within that same field. So as I mentioned, doing other kinds of things relating to story, which are including reading, etc., which are inspirational and can give me ideas when I go back into the game market. Taking a break for a couple of weeks and not doing anything relating to game mastering is something which is pretty valuable. I got to do that a little bit when I was on this trip, except for the D&D event. I was spending most of my time just with friends and sightseeing, and that was a very,
Yeah.
that was cool. I could kind of not concentrate on that. Sometimes doing something which has nothing at all to do with any of those things can help too, though, by the way. Like sometimes I do like watching sports. It's sometimes fun to just watch a college basketball game,
Yeah, I was
especially
just
if
about
you're
to
with the
say.
Connecticut Huskies, the best college basketball team of all time. But like, you know what I mean? Like it's enjoyable sometimes to do something which is just totally different in that vein. But I think it's important to recognize as sort of a last comment that I'll make about this, and I'm curious to see how you feel. One of the things about burnout is it's important to recognize that burnout does not mean you no longer love the thing that you're burned out doing. I think it is more that you no longer feel like you can reach the creative and energetic capacity you need to produce work at the level you want. There's an old saw in classical music production that says if you don't practice for a day, you know it. If you don't practice for 2 days, the conductor knows it. If you don't practice for 3 days, the audience knows it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a certain level at which you want to stop the burnout when it's at the level that you know it. When it gets to the point that people
Mm.
in the audience know that you're mailing it in, and we can both think about actual plays and stuff like that
Yeah.
that we've seen that we're like, these people are kind of mailing it in here. That's likely to be because they're not into it, and that may very well be about burnout. So if you, dear audience, are experiencing this, one of the best things I could suggest is to obviously take a break. That's easy if you can manage it, but also to shift the way in which you are creating within that field for a little bit. So if you've been doing a lot of GMing, see if you can maybe play for a little bit, even if you can play a one shot or two. See if you can maybe read a little bit that's not just in the field. Go read a thriller, go read a mystery, go read an interesting bit of nonfiction, historical or otherwise. Maybe just go outside and meditate and let the wind be in your face and not be
Touch
thinking about it at
grass.
all. Touch grass, but these are all things that vary things up. It's not that you have permanently burned out your ability to like something, like you ate too much of chocolate covered strawberries and now you can't even look at one without it making you sick. It's not
Yeah.
that. It's that your brain is asking you for a different creative avenue to get into the work that you're thinking about. And so, just as you could get burned out writing, I do believe people can, just as you could get burned out, watching TV, just as you could get burned out watching movies or whatever, you can get burned out game mastering and playing games. And the answer to that, I think, is to remain interested in story, remain interested in friendships and community and all the good things that game mastering brings, but do it from a different angle for a little while, and recognize that you want better experiences, not just more experiences. So that's what I would say. So what about, but I mean, you do this professionally where you're getting paid, for this thing on a regular basis. So
Yeah.
what happens to you when you have people who are like, I want to run this, and you're like, yes, I will run once again, I will run the Keep on the Borderlands or whatever. Like, how do you handle that?
So yeah, I would concur with everything that you just laid out. I think that was amazing, better than I could have put it. Um, but I do see though, I think when we ask our questions, at least for myself, when I ask you questions, it oftentimes is a commentary at a certain point of where I'm at this
Ah,
moment.
so you're really like,
So
how do I handle
sometimes,
burnout?
yeah, hey, sometimes on this podcast, the premise of this podcast is we ask each other questions that we don't know, the other person doesn't know about, and sometimes it is just an excuse for me to ask you a question.
Okay.
Um, which not to say that I'm getting burnt out, but I've noticed in your description a distinct difference, but it's also maybe a similarity at the same time between the burnout that I'm feeling and the burnout that you described. And the burnout you described had to do with too much of one thing
Yeah.
generally, of like 5 games a month and that causing burnout, like just not being able to maintain your energy with so much going on. So, a problem of quantity. The burnout I'm experiencing is a burnout of quality,
Oh,
where I don't have too much going on. I'm about to again. My programs are restarting, and when I never feel burnt out working with kids. Like there are very difficult days where I'm like, God, I don't think I succeeded in anything today. I didn't like, I had teachable moments, and all the teachable moments flew right over those kids'
yeah,
heads,
yeah.
and either my fault or they weren't paying attention, whatever. But I never feel burnt out. Rarely ever feel burnt out with the kids. But with professional DMing or one shots or weekly campaigns that I run, the burnout that I'm feeling is if and sometimes it's something that can be solved, that it can't. These things have to do with like the dynamics of the groups that you have at your table, for example. So the kind of burnout I'm describing is the sort that precedes, I mean, we've had to be dealing with this, the sort that precedes a group falling apart,
Yeah.
or difficulties that come up from group dynamics.
Yep.
And the burnout I'm experiencing and having to navigate around is feeling like I'm hitting a wall in my GMing ability to handle the quality at the table.
Uh-huh.
Um, and this is not just in a single campaign or a single one shot, but to give a specific example, like if I have a campaign that has been running for 40 sessions now, and we're about to start session 41, and my thought is like, dang, we've been doing this for a long time. And it's not really a question of the quantity of it being a long time. Maybe that's a part of it, but the part of it is needing to approach it from a different angle because it feels like all the same thing, or just little things where the players will join the session and they don't seem overjoyed to play, or the session itself goes okay, but you're not doing, as you said, the greatest job that you wanted to behind the screen.
Right.
So the burnout I'm experiencing is the loss of inspiration and drive, is feeling like I'm hitting a wall with like, what can I do to make the quality of this game better? And it's not necessarily a quantity thing. But then with one shots, that can happen as well, where it's like, yeah, I'll be hired to run the same one shot because I inevitably, to save my own time, when I'm encountering a group of people for the first time over and over and over, of course I'll run the same thing because these people have not seen it before, and
Right.
I can save myself the work. Um, and there is a part of that process where I'm constantly improving from game to game to game what that one shot
Right.
is structured like and things
Right.
like that. But anyway, that the kind of burnout that I'm experiencing right now seems to be more of quality, where it's like I have regular campaigns, or I have, for example, if I have groups of kids that I see that are at the same table, and you feel like you've tried the same techniques with these kids, or there's a certain behavior, or one kid always has a tendency to downplay another kid, and all these techniques that I've tried and has not worked. And so I think, though, even in the case of quality, of not too much going on, but the going on itself is not going in the direction that you want, I still tend to do the same thing that you suggested anyway. And I think the solutions are similar, of, going out to different fields, playing a video game, watching a show, reading a book, touching grass, going outside, whatever. And that does tend to help, because I feel like my experience of life is that I almost feel like there are chapters in my life where I'm, flipping pages month to month, time to
Right.
time. I'm changing as a person. And so naturally the process of time can help change that too. But generally, how, and specifically, sorry, how I deal with burnout, I would say, aside from like just switching up fields, is I think I often get fascinated by specific ideas. And I think the solution that I'm going for this time, with a problem of quality, for example, like I have a, a kid whose behavior is continually an issue in a specific way, or I have this campaign of 40 sessions and it just kind of feels like it's slogging along. Everyone's still showing up. No one's blatantly saying, "Hey, I'm not enjoying this anymore," but it's just this feeling of like, "Huh, I don't. This isn't really
Mm-hmm.
going
Mm-hmm.
the way I want." The solution that I'm thinking is to think of an idea, if there's a specific person or a specific player or a character that, isn't getting the attention that you think they should get, or a scene that's not really happening, to actively go to these other medias, video games, so on, and mine them for ideas, and then apply those ideas and think of almost like gifts, what would really apply to,
Yeah.
or presence, to that specific player.
Yep.
So if it's a problem of engagement or feeling like the campaign's a slog, then come up with something that'll take it in a new direction, an idea that's exciting to you, and then also being cognizant what ideas are exciting to your players. And then I think ultimately with burnout as well, the last thing I'll say is when you're burnt out in any other field, fields that are very sort of soloist, like if you're burnt out with engineering or with writing your own novel or
Mm-hmm.
something like that, or practicing your instrument, then that can be a very isolating thing that you're experiencing by yourself, of being burnt out over your field that has to do with you. But if you can interact with other people and interface with other people and communicate with them just in general, sometimes that automatically causes the problem to fix itself. If you're a musician and you talk with other musicians and get inspiration from them,
Right.
or you're a writer, you talk with other writers. And the good thing about D&D is because it is necessarily a social game, if there is a problem, and this is the advice I'm giving myself as well, if there's a problem that has to do with burnout surrounding a specific group of people or a dynamic at the table, then communicate about it, because sometimes that burnout just needs to be addressed.
Yep.
And maybe the other people don't know that you're burnt out. And so I think that's a benefit that D&D has, where if you are burnt out on GMing, that GMing is a social thing to do. And so, I think my advice, dear listeners, also is to, if there's something that can be solved by just communicating, uh, sometimes I find myself trying to solve problems that are happening in game when really it's a problem that maybe should be solved out of game.
Yes.
Or constantly trying to like, oh, what would entertain this person, what would make them enjoy playing. And the question of if they're enjoying playing, maybe they are, and it's just a perception that I have.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that's sort of what's been bouncing around in my mind
Oh, I
regarding that.
mean, and I think, the thing I want to say about that is, I think that's actually really helpful because one of the things we need to remember is that we have a tendency, I think, as GMs to, and I'm immediately thinking as I'm about to say this that I'm going to get a bunch of the Blades in the Dark folks be like, well, if you know you had to play a narrative focused game, this wouldn't happen to you, right? Because you don't have to. But like a lot of the GMs and DMs that I know feel a great amount of responsibility for the way something is happening, right? We all talk about the idea that
Yes.
it's on
Yeah.
us to make sure that something runs properly. And on the one hand, there's a lot of excitement in that, and there's a lot of joy in it. And I think there's a lot of overlap from people who would like being directors, either of movies or of plays, and like being in a DMing role because they like to coordinate and to sort of see how things come together. And
Yeah.
hopefully, if you're doing it right, you like to see people having a great time, right? But I think what that means is that there is a time when you can sometimes feel as a DM like you're a overworked court jester, and you're
Yeah.
just like up there juggling, and like you're gonna drop a ball or two, and you can't. If you ever say to someone, "I feel like I don't know whether this is going the way I need it to," the fear is then you've pulled the curtain back,
Yeah.
and like all of a sudden you've shown what the magnificent Mr. Oz, Mr. Oz looks like, right? The
Hmm.
Wizard of Oz is actually just this con man, right? And there's this worry that
Mm.
it will break the magic and the immersion of it. And the reality is that if you've done it right, the immersion and magic of the experience remains the minute you are re-immersed, right? But you can do a better job when you have faith in your players to tell you what they do and don't need and what fun they are and aren't having. So there are times when like, everybody wants to have, this is something that I try to tell a lot of people when I did debate coaching. No one actually wants you to fail. Like no one wants to sit in a speech and watch you giving a speech and be like, I can't wait to watch a train wreck. Like for all the jokes about this, most people don't want to watch train wrecks. They
Yeah.
want to be inspired, they want to be moved, they want to see successful stuff. They are waiting for people to give them awesome stuff to work with. So given that fact, your players are very much in the same mode that everyone wants this game to succeed. Everyone wants to have a good time, especially if you had a good time at the beginning. They want to go back to that. They want to be back to having a good time, even if it's true that they're not having a good a time as they may have had before. And so I think it is important to be able to, as a DM, check in with your players to sort of turn around the narrative weight so that sometimes, a lot of times, questions asked of the players, like, and this is something I've been working on a lot over the last couple of years in particular, like, how do you know these people? How do
Hmm.
you know this person that you just met? You just walk into this place, and this place that you walked into, the bartender, slides down a mug of mead to you. How do you know the bartender? Like, you've met them before, right? How did you do that?
Yeah.
Like those things that give them not only build agency in their characters, but it gives you a break and it gives you something to play off of. Like I consider myself a really good counterpunching DM, where when someone is like, "This matters to me," I'm like, "Oh, write down the note," like because then I can use that, and it's an idea that I wouldn't have gotten on my own necessarily, but it means a lot to them, and now I can try to build on that going forward. But I only know that as long as I stop thinking of myself as this, movie director who just keeps talking and talking and talking, and no one gets to play.
Right.
That's the easiest way to burn out, is when you feel like it's just a bunch of people like in your show, and that's not what it ought to be, right? It ought to be you. The best DMs are the ones who can present a world and a story in such a way that everyone makes that story what it is, and you are collaborating with them, as we've said many times on this show. Well, that means that sometimes you need to consciously, signpostingly, if that's a word, get them to contribute and be like, hey, what about this? What about that? What about the other in game? And out of game, I totally agree with you. You also need to ask some questions. Out of game, you need to be like, hey, this is feeling this way to me. I want to know how you folks are feeling. It seems like everything's going okay, but I also get the sense that maybe it's gone a little flat over the last couple of sessions. And do we have a sense of why? And there are times when people will either they'll say, "Hey, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm having a blast," in which case, okay. Or B, they may be like, "Yeah, well, I've been kind of distracted with this, that, and the other." Or they might be like, "Well, I feel like there's been a lot of combat, and I guess that's not really my favorite thing. So I was hoping to,
Yeah.
these things that they wouldn't tell you on their own, unless you ask them, that can be hugely helpful, it seems to me, to do that. So sort of regular check-in sessions really are important, and being able to sort of return the agency once again back to them. You should be trying to do that a lot anyway, but returning it back to them again so that they become responsible for, as they should be, some of the story and not just you telling this narrative the whole time. And that
Yeah.
takes an enormous amount of pressure off, I think, because it goes back to what it really is supposed to be: a bunch of friends having a blast, hanging out with each other, having a good time, and having sometimes a time that they'll remember not just for the laughs, but for the emotions they felt. It can be very moving to be in games like this. And
Hmm.
that's often when you give credit to your players to let them do a lot of that work. So, pull back the curtain and show them the wizard, I guess is what I'm saying, a lot more than we sometimes do. Because I
Yeah.
think mystifying it doesn't help and sort of puts way more pressure on you, in my experience, as the DM or GM, I think.
Yep. I You've reminded me of I had a conversation with players from one of my campaigns recently in sort of our stars and wishes at the end, and one of them mentioned something that stuck with me because we had a session where they spent most of the session deciding what ship to take out to sea for their voyage, and that can be cool. I made a whole table chart that compared the durability of each ship, each ship's speed, the capability of its crew. But the problem is that we spent basically 4 hours just deciding what ship to take,
Okay, that could be
which
okay.
again can be okay, but it was sort of nothing happened really. Like it was a bunch of conversation. There was some intrigue, like this things happen, but what this player said is This player I'd noticed, especially near the start of the session, and then they said themselves, was at the start of the session they kind of just felt overwhelmed and sort of, I don't want to say shut down because they still played, but weren't as like animated about interacting with what was going on because of all the options that were presented.
Yeah, 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 sure.
And what they said was, at a certain point after talking for a bit, was, I think I need less choices to make and more things to do. And I was like, oh, that is
Wow.
great advice to me, because that I had given them so many choices. I gave them four different ships with all these variable stats, and like, okay, here, but this one has this, and do you want that? But this crew has this problem. And that was I did that as an approach for player agency. Like, I wanted them to have options. Of course, I wasn't just going to be like, you board a ship and set out to sea. But
Right.
the problem that created is they had too many choices to make and not enough stuff to do. And they didn't get to do anything. We didn't set out to sea yet. They had some role play moments with the ships, but didn't really accomplish anything. They just learned stuff. So that was a great sentence that has stuck with me, that I think has to do with that communication
Yeah,
aspect that you were
yeah.
just talking about, of pulling back the curtain, and great player advice to a GM of like, sometimes agency isn't choice, it's letting them do stuff. So
Yes, and I think that's really interesting because it also suggests that they want the things that they do to be meaningful. They want the things that they do to have impact, right, in the
mhm.
world on their story. But they don't necessarily need 500 different possible ways to do that, right?
Yeah,
500 choices that don't really impact much, as opposed to a couple of things that impact a lot. Um, and
yeah,
it's interesting for all that we talk a lot, and I know we do this slightly as tabletop snobs about how, computer role-playing games limit your choices and they just give you, BioWare's like, emotion wheel of like three options and like we can give you a million options. But the reality is that in the end, people are choosing things along a couple of basic axes, right?
yeah,
This is the same thing with story plots. Thematically, you can have lots of plots, you can have lots of different characters, you can have lots of different things. Thematically, there are only a few main thematic stories. There are stories about vengeance, there are stories about love, there are stories about faith or the loss of faith, or the redemption, the regaining of faith. There are stories about triumph, about defeat. There are comedies and tragedies. There are a few of these things, but it's not like Shakespeare did not write 100 different thematic ideas.
right,
He really didn't. What distinguished Shakespeare from everybody else is the way that he focused on a couple of major themes, and those themes are one that seem quite familiar to us. But the way in which they're deployed, the way in which they're executed, become important to us on a much different level because we too experience those same kind of basic themes. So if you think about that in a game context, yeah, if you're giving people options that matter as opposed to just more options that don't
yeah,
seem to matter much,
yeah,
that obviously makes a big difference. And that is one reason why I think when people talk about sandbox campaigns, I think it's important. I think you think sandbox campaigns can be great if you have a central thematic focus that is holding it together so that it doesn't get aimless. And that's why I say the Curse of Strahd sandbox works, because right in the background is always Strahd.
yeah,
How do I deal with Strahd? But how you deal with Strahd, like I go here, I go there, I do whatever, those are different options. But in the end, you have to take that bastard down, right? And like that's that's a kind of thematic coherency, let's put it that way, that people really love in their games, the sense that they're making a difference and that they have a clear sense of what's before them, as opposed to just sort of aimlessness. Um, I'm sorry, I'm going on way too far, but this is a really
no,
interesting topic. Like
yeah, it is.
Damon Knight, Damon Knight. I think I've showed you this picture before, but Damon Knight in Creating Short Fiction talks about
Yeah,
the featureless story, right, where you have a guy in a desert and person can go anywhere, can go
right,
any place,
yeah,
fly up,
yeah,
down,
I
left, right,
remember that
sideways, whatever,
chart.
right? But there's no story there because there's nothing to constrain the choices, so it's not really about anything. It's about Superman without the conceit of Superman is always an alien in his own home planet or whatever. Like
Mm,
there are ways that you make Superman interesting, and it's by making Superman himself conflicted. But if your story is really just here's a guy who can do anything at any time to anybody, okay, right? And that I think is a little bit what we're talking about here is providing them fewer but more meaningful choices that feel like they have impact according to them.
yeah.
And so
Yep.
that's
And
that.
I
That
guess to
yeah,
to put a ribbon on the ultimately the question about burnout, which we've both said our piece on. I think, yeah, the thing that was in my mind that I hadn't said yet about burnout is sometimes burnout has nothing to do with the game and has
sure.
everything to do with your life,
Oh, of course,
um,
of
which
course.
luckily I feel like I'm actually feeling pretty great right now in my
Good.
life, so I can narrow in on like, no, this is a problem in this campaign
Yeah,
or with this, this kid or whatever. Um, but yeah, that's always a part of it too. It's like no matter how great your GMing is, if a loved one just passed away, or if this is going on, or if you can't pay your rent, or whatever is happening, then of course, that's going to subconsciously bleed into everything else.
absolutely.
So, and sometimes I find even if I don't feel like I have something that big going on that is causing dysfunction in my GMing or something, still taking moments for self-care and like going out on a walk, like, man, not that my room or my house is oppressive at all. I love where I live, I love my room, I love the work that I do in here, but sometimes oftentimes when I go out on a walk, the first thing that I think is like, man, this I feel like a totally different person now than I
Yep,
felt the whole rest of the day.
yep.
So that
Totally agree with
sometimes,
that.
yeah, touch
And
touch grass is an important
I
thing.
I do want to say too, maybe this may be a show. This may be our first ever show where we do just one question because
Yeah,
I mean, the discussion was really
we'll
great. So
see. We'll see. Yeah.
but like one of the things I was going to say about that is I I'm going to offer
Go
a
ahead.
personal story here for a moment.
Hmm.
I've had two reactions to this, and I'm curious what you've had in your own
Great.
experience. Um, I've had players who have been through tragedies in their lives who have, for obvious reasons,
Yeah.
not wanted to play because they were
Hmm.
just in a state where they couldn't do it.
Yep.
And medical stuff sometimes too. Like in the personal story I was going to offer is there was shortly after I had incidents, a couple of incidents of heart arrhythmia some years ago, and they landed me in the hospital both times. And that was scary. Obviously, it was very frightening and sort of like I was kind of like, is this it? Like the rest of my life is just going to be like this? I'm gonna that sort of thing. Um, and in those moments, I remember there were a couple times when I was supposed to be playing D&D or whatever, and I felt my heart was kind of like in this weird shaky spot I felt, and I remember talking to these people, and I was like, guys, I can't do this tonight, but I was like, but, and this is before I knew you, I think. I was like, but also I kind of don't want to be alone and just sort of deal with it. And because they're good people and friends, they were like, no, we just want to hang out with you. You know what I mean? And like talk to you and just sort of see how things are going, which you can't necessarily do. And you can't expect that of players if it's a professional context. But, it is important to recognize that this is a communal affair. And in a lot of ways, this D&D provides us in many cases a context for friendship and socialization. And so there are times where that exists and you can reach out to them. But I also wanted to say that I've also had the other reaction where I've had people who have been through tragedies who have been like, I actually really need the game tonight because I don't want to be thinking about whatever it is I'm thinking about. And that actually is more common in my experience than the other. I've had
Mine too.
both, but I would say it's more common for someone to be like, man, I've been looking forward to this game because I just can't spend another moment thinking about whatever my mother is going through, my significant other, the world, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that's very interesting to me because it suggests that dungeon mastering and Dungeons and Dragons for people exists in both a parallel sense to their lives, but also in a very different capacity to their lives where it can be escapist. And escapism is not an evil. You know, it's not, sometimes people think of escapism as this really like, oh, it's like, it's just escapism is to dismiss it. Not necessarily. Sometimes escapism is exactly what you need. As we were just saying, we were talking about going and touching grass. Sometimes you've been touching grass, and you want to not do that now. Now you want to go inside and you want to have an imaginative experience that doesn't involve your life. And you just want to escape into this other world. And there's nothing wrong with that either. So
Yeah.
my experience has been that I've gotten both reactions to that. Is that how you've also experienced it, where you've had
Hmm.
people that are like, I can't do it, but also sometimes people are like, no, please, like I really want to do this.
100%. Yes. I can think of one specific example that I'll give in a moment, but I am sure over the years I had my old high school and college buddies that you know, everyone has like their home game that they play of D&D, and
Right,
D, and this
right.
was my home game group of guys. And when we played, there were I can think back now, I can count, like thinking about each person, like, oh, this happened to him, this happened to him, this happened to them. And we still played. The thing that was common is that we still played and we still wanted to play, and the person who that was happening to still wanted to play. And the specific example, well, yeah, and those are all examples of still wanting to play. I think there are plenty of examples. They're harder to remember because they're not as memorable when someone has said, "Hey, this is going on. I'm not going to be there
Sure.
tonight,"
Oh, of
or "Let's
course, of
not
course.
play." Then nothing happened. And you were just there to support your friend. But so at the time when to for a personal example for me, that's really a great memory. Honestly, this the way I'm starting this sentence and the way the sentence is ending are not going to match up. But a great
Okay.
memory I had when my mother died
Oh, jeez.
was when that happened. Obviously very traumatic. It was only a couple years ago, and it sucked, to put it in a few words.
Yep.
But that happened at like 1 a.m. The following day, is when you start calling family members and, people that weren't as immediate that don't know yet because it happened so late. And then that night, so the day after this had just happened, leaving me and my brother and my dad, absolutely bereft, uh, all of our local friends, came over to support us. And that night and then the following day, we spent so much time. I think in some campaigns at the moment, I don't have too many memories of D&D around the time that my mom passed, but I'm sure I played and I'm sure it helped. But the thing that has to do with this that you brought up is that when they came over, the day after my mom passed, we spent the whole day playing It Takes Two on Xbox, which is a video game, co-op video game where it literally takes two people. You have to have two controllers, whatever. And the whole premise is that you're playing two characters and it's a bunch of puzzles. It's almost like you and I played those. We
Yeah,
were
you and I
here
played
and
one of those,
we
right?
were here together.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, right,
it's
right.
not the same. Uh, what's the word? Not the same publisher or game or anything, but that style, or like Portal 2's co-op sort of thing.
Right, right.
Whole day just playing that game, and it was great. It was wonderful. It was exactly what we needed because we had just been through something terrible and had through the reality of how she passed, had spent much of that previous day processing it, or going through it up to that point, and then to have all of those friends show up and to have something joyful and to turn that passing into, again, it wasn't an ignorance of what was going on, because that
No.
whole first part of that day we had spent 5 or 6 hours calling family members and talking about what had happened, right? So it was absolutely wonderful. And I felt a little guilty at first of like, this literally just happened. But then I had to stop myself. I was like, well, we did everything that we needed to do today. There's more to do tomorrow. And it was a welcome distraction. And honestly, it had been some time since we'd seen some of the people that had come over. And when was the last time that all of them had come over at once? That's one of the
Right.
strange realities of when people pass, and the reality of funerals is that it brings people together strangely.
Yep.
And so that's a very good memory that I have. And when I see that game, which actually it won Game of the Year because I think that was 2021. It won Game of the Year, Eight Takes Two. And whenever I see that game, I'm like, yep, that's the game that helped me get through my mom's passing. Because me and my brother played it for a little bit that morning as we were taking breaks, just spending time with each other. And then when all of our friends came over, there were times where I was playing it with my brother's friend, or my brother's friend was playing it with my friend, or all over. Like me and my brother were taking breaks and we're just chilling out
Yeah.
on the couch, and and so yes, I think that's a again under the general umbrella of burnout and alternatives and the meaning of gaming. I think that it's and something you mentioned earlier too of like you if you're looking at your game and for whatever reason the game night gets canceled and you're like, whew, glad it got canceled. That and if that's happening, not a good thing. That was a great thing that you said, because there are times I think that happens more as a professional GM of at least in my case where I mean it's rarer that professional games get canceled because people are paying for them and it is my line of work, so I want to run them. But because speaking of the jester of like constantly performing like, aha, I'm a professional GM, look at what I've prepared, it's wonderful, yes, no, well, look at this trick, have you seen this? Yes. Oh, that's even worse,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
So yeah, turning to those other things, turning to other forms of gaming, and even in grief or things that are going on in your life, letting and even professionally, I think it's a good reminder too that for all the troubles that I might experience as a professional game master, feeling like sometimes I hit a wall with the quality of my games, like how, ooh, I can tell. That's a big worry professionally as
Yeah.
well, to say, is like I want people to get their money's worth, of course. And so when I can sense that that's not happening, which again might be partly my perception, might be partly truth, then I'm like, oh God, what can I do? And if I can't solve it quickly, then I'm like, oh God. And so, yeah, I think the experience of communication, being together, uh, working with other people, even professionally, yeah, this was the point I was going to make. That even in professional games, of course, in professional games, the point is to have fun. It's still a game, you know. And sometimes I found too, I've taken professional games a little too seriously, or like trying to tell some grand sweepstaking, story that pulls you off your feet and immersive this, immersive that. But if people aren't coming and they're not enjoying it, or if these problems are happening or cropping up, then yeah, it's the game should be fun. They should be an escape, a something that gives you a life experience, something to reflect on, something to learn from. So, yeah.
And every game, and every game is different, and and you can get different things from different games, as well. You don't need to have, not all things need to be all in one game. I do want to sort of finish this section, or, probably finish the episode, I guess. But I do want to say also that what you're also referring to, I think, is a question of grace, right? It's about giving grace to yourself and to other people, to sort of be who they are, where they are, when they are. And that's a bigger topic than just game design or gameplay. But that also accounts for the DM. I hope it's clear to folks who are watching us that this needs to be fun for you too. That this needs to be an experience that you enjoy
Yeah.
also.
Oh gosh.
And if you are feeling as if you are letting people down and you're weighed under the burden of the ba ba da ba ba da ba, then you need to reassess and talk to these other folks to reassess how you can make this an enjoyable experience also. Number one, because it's harder to be able to be a good GM if you're hating every second of it.
Yeah.
Number one, but number two, because just for yourself, you have the right to enjoy the experience. Like, I genuinely enjoy and love the process of DMing and GMing and watching stories to come together, and telling stories with friends and watching those friends have a great time, and then I have a great time because
Hmm.
the humor and the wit and the moving moments and all that. That, listen, I mean, those are extraordinarily important and special to me. So it's why it's my favorite. Why Dungeons and Dragons is my favorite game. It's why I love GMing. I love this stuff.
Yeah.
Um, But if you get to the point where it's not fun for you, and you really are you feel it's a slog, please have the grace for yourself to start figuring out how you can do this to avoid burnout. Not for your players, that's important too. Not for the people around you, but for you. How do you avoid burnout so that you can enjoy this experience? Because ultimately, you should get happiness and enjoyment out of what you do, in hopefully in most things, but certainly in something like this. So
Yeah.
just, keep that in mind also, I
Yep.
would say.
Yeah. I would say to add on to that as well. Yeah, D&D, any tabletop game that you play. I've never played Call of Cthulhu, but that is one that comes to mind where I guess actually, yeah, this leads to another rhetorical question of to think about when you get together to play with your friends or your family or your clients or whoever it happens to be, or your cast members. What is the point of that game? Is in an actual play show, the point of the game is to have fun and to tell a good story, but you're also playing for an audience, and that is something that you have to be aware of. And when you're playing with friends, it's just a, as they say, a beer and pretzels game. Like, we're not here to tell the next Shakespearean, drama. We're here to, attack some goblins
Right.
or to, create our kingdom or to go to the tavern or whatever. Um, and with professional games as well, questioning what the point of that is, and the point's going to be different to different people, and it's going to be a bit like a graph where it's like, okay, how fun do we want this game to be versus how serious versus how
Right,
meaningful
right,
versus
right.
so
Which is about communication also, with your
exactly,
players.
yeah. So yeah, just all things to be aware of, I think, and things that I can am considering, and I know that you consider when thinking about if you're hitting a wall with too many games going on. That that's uh that's a problem that I envy of just like, oh, okay, I just need to have less on my plate.
Yeah.
The
Well,
sometimes it's that is easier said than done sometimes as well, but yeah, the problem otherwise of having just enough on your plate, but not knowing how you're going to cook it properly,
yeah.
uh, is there's a lot that goes into that. So, which I've started getting into cooking too, just as a little side note, which
Ah,
is great.
nice.
Yes,
Outstanding.
I
See?
make a very mean Alfredo with spinach and chicken. If
Outstanding.
you
This
want
is
some.
something that the next time I see you in person, I need to
Ah,
figure out a
yes,
way that we
yeah.
can make that
We'll
happen,
go. I'll go to the store. I'll cook it.
Yeah.
I'll make it
No, this
happen.
that's awesome, and is another way of uh touching grass, except in this case touching cheese, I guess would be
Yeah,
the would be the
yeah.
would be the
Hmm.
equivalent.
Well,
But
is
good
that
stuff,
is
man.
that an
Well,
episode? Wow,
I
we
think that's I think that's
yeah.
pretty much an episode. Normally we try to ask one of each, but I think in this case there was a lot of good back and forth there. So I'd
Hmm.
actually be curious, and I know that our wonderful editor Live Suing is going to be doing shorts of this as well. But for those who have come to this point, I would love, I'd love to have that ask that question, like, what do you do in cases of burnout if you're a GM? Like, what does
Yeah.
GM burnout look like for you? If you're a player, what does player burnout look like for you? How do you handle it, and so on?
Mm.
Because I think that's an interesting discussion that is obviously something that a lot of people have talked about before. But this is a way to kind of stretch it out and think of it in terms of advice. So we're pulling on the Gen GM's hive mind, is what I'm saying, to kind
Yes.
of assemble it together.
Yep.
And
And sometimes burnout too, it being such a broad thing, and the fact that we spent almost the last 90 minutes or so uh, defining the idea that burnout can involve so many different things. Sometimes burnout is a trick question, and really it is one specific thing. Like you really just need to talk to that person, or
right, right.
you have had way too much combat, or you have way too much going on in your plate, or this is happening in your life. And that is the main thing behind the
Yep.
burnout. So yes, a lot of it too is just being cognizant of yourself and what's going on, and
And getting to the root cause of this stuff. Yep.
exactly. So
Yep.
okay, well, that was good. We
It
had
was
our
good.
little book mini game at the start. That was fun. Should we have little mini games at the
Yeah, I
start
mean,
of our
sometimes
podcast?
we can do these mini games, I think, for sure. I'm always about that.
Do you know the author?
Can you look? Yes, exactly. But yeah, it was good time. So please spread the word, folks. Let people know about the show. Please again leave comments. Tell us if you were enjoying it. And we love when we get those comments and get a lot of
Yeah.
back and forth about this stuff. And this is we're recording as of September 3rd, so this long
Yep.
form should be going up within, I think, sometime within the next 9 to 10 days would be my guess. We'll have a couple shorts before that, and then
Mhm.
we'll record another one towards the end of the month that we'll get up there as well. And we
Yeah.
will keep on rolling. And when we get to 100 subscribers, uh, big things will
Yeah.
happen. The explanation of the glasses, and
Ah, yes.
all that
Uh-huh.
stuff. This is
Where I
all,
got him.
that this is all going to
Yeah.
happen.
Which and I think I think I mentioned in the podcast earlier in our opening minutes that as of today, September 3rd, as you mentioned it, the
Yeah, the
new,
PHP, the new one. Yep.
yeah, the new Player's Handbook comes out for D&D. So we'll likely talk about that at some point. I started to
Yes.
take a look at it today, but it's deceptive because it's so similar and it's backwards compatible with 5e that you really have to look at it for a while and to analyze it to be like, ah, okay,
Yep.
this is distinctly different or this is
I
new. So
I am looking
it'll be
forward to doing
interesting.
exactly that in
Yeah,
the next few weeks. Yeah, it's going to be a good time.
cool.
We have
All
a good
right.
time. All right. Well, thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Greg. This has been wonderful. Nice hat, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's my
Yeah.
I got it at Saratoga earlier this year. It's a Kangol hat.
Uh-huh.
And what I like about it is it's sweat resistant because I sweat sometimes through my hats, and that's disgusting. So anyway, but thank you. We will see you folks soon. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.